com. And I'm doing a show tonight, and I'm working on Friday night's show. Sunday may be a repeat that members have heard. It all depends on how things play out. But this weekend, what I'm going to try to do is get up to Mount St. Helens and do some filming for you guys. I'll be heading to the location of where the Ape Canyon story took place, where Fred Beck and the miners were attacked on Mount St. Helens in their cabin. The cabin's no longer there, but we think we have the location nailed down. And so I'll be filming it. I'll post it up for you guys to take a look. I think it'll be, if you don't live in Washington State, might be a cool thing to see. So look for that this weekend. And I'll be updating you on the blog for what's coming up Friday night. Well, let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Alan to the show. Alan, thanks for coming on. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, you bet, Wes. Thanks for having me.
And if you would, Alan, now you had a very interesting encounter. I know the picture you sent me when I first looked at it, I posted it to the website, just see the waterfalls. When I very first looked at that picture, my eyes were kind of drawn to a figure in the top left-hand corner of the picture. And I was just really interested. I was reading through your encounter as you and I talked earlier today. I was very fascinated by the encounter. But if you would, for the audience, can you talk about what you were doing and then walk the audience right into the encounter?
Yeah, you bet. Absolutely. So this took place on October 10th. I live in Whitefish, Montana. It was my girlfriend and I's first anniversary, so we wanted to kind of do something outside of the norm, you know, going to dinner and all that stuff. So we decided we'd go hiking. I'm a photographer as well, and I wanted to go to this place called Martin Falls, which is in Olney, Montana. Olney, Montana is about, I would say, about 20, 25 miles outside of Whitefish. It's a little town that was real big during the railroad boom back at the turn of the century, but now it's just kind of falling apart. And to get to Martin Falls, you got to go about 15 miles back up into the mountains, back behind Olney. So I wanted to go up there. I wanted her to see the waterfalls, and I wanted to, you know, do some landscape photography of the waterfalls, long exposure, things like that. So we got up there and we got into the falls, and to get to the falls from the road, it's probably not even a quarter of a mile where we parked. So we got into the falls, and I set up my camera and I was taking pictures, and she was kind of walking around by the side of the falls and everything. And I happened to look over, and she had just started climbing a game trail. On the right-hand side of the waterfall was this little game trail that was probably, I'd say 3 or 4 inches wide that went up to the very top of the falls. Now, to get up to the top of the falls, it's about a 100-foot fall to get up there. And so she wanted to go up there, and I asked her, I said, babe, what are you doing? She goes, well, I saw this, you know, trail, and I wanted to climb it. You know, which is in of itself really out of the ordinary for her. She's not one who likes, you know, to climb things. You know, she'd rather stay down on the ground. So I was pretty surprised by that. So I said, okay, hold on a second. And I packed up all my gear, put everything in my backpack. You know, I had a tripod, a professional camera, basically the whole 9 yards that I was carrying. I was carrying all my gear. So I packed that all up, and we started climbing this trail, this little game trail. That took about 30 minutes to get up to the top of this game trail. Once we got up to the top, it started raining. So we kind of hid under some of the bushes and everything, because I didn't want to get my backpack wet with my camera. Now, back up behind the falls, it's a series of step falls that kind of lead back into the woods, way, way back in the woods. And so I thought, well, you know, we got a little bit of daylight left. You know, we should go check out these waterfalls, because I wanted to get some more pictures. So we started walking back, and it was basically like bushwhacking through this stuff. There was no trail. And this is a real old growth forest. So the trees are really big and thick, and it's just heavy, heavy canopy. So we started going back. You know, we stopped at one place. I took a couple pictures, and then she wanted to keep going further up. So we went further up, and I found this one area that I really wanted to shoot. So I unpacked all my gear, and I was getting everything set up, and I was, you know, 1 foot in the creek, 1 foot on the bank, kind of perching to take these shots. Well, she had wandered up ahead of me about 50 feet up to this next series of falls. And she was kind of up there doing her own thing. I didn't really think about what was going on. I had pretty much zoned out. And I was kind of in my own little world doing my photography. And she came back. And when she came back, she just had this look on her face where I knew something was wrong. I mean, her eyes were really big. And she just kind of looks at me and she goes, babe, something's wrong here. I was like, what do you mean something's wrong here? She goes, something's not right. There's something up there. And I'm kind of thinking, okay, we're out in the woods, it's after 6, it's starting to get dark and whatnot. So, I just thought maybe she was getting kind of scared at that point. And I just got this weird feeling all of a sudden just to move my head to the right for some reason. I don't know why, but no sooner had I got that urge and I moved my head, a big branch came rocketing out of the canopy up above us. It was a good 4 or 5 foot long branch. And if I hadn't moved my head, it would have hit me in the top of the head. But it hit my hand in the side of my camera, the barrel of my lens. And right away, that's when I got this feeling that, we need to get out of here and we need to get out of here now. Something is very, very bad here. And like I said before, I had, 1 foot in the creek and 1 foot on the bank. And I'm trying to get my stuff packed up. And I'm telling her, I'm like, we got to go. We got to go now. Go. Just start going. And that's when I turned and I looked across the creek. Now, the creek was probably, 10, 15 feet wide. It wasn't a very wide creek. And I saw something big and black dart between the trees on the other side of the bank. And this thing was huge. If I had to guess, probably 8, 9, 10 feet tall. But it was so quick that I couldn't really make out a shape when it went between the trees. And at that point in time, adrenaline kind of kicked in. And we had 2 choices to go. We had, the way we had came up, or running parallel to this creek was a road, an access road that we hadn't noticed before. The only way we noticed it was, about 5 minutes before this, a truck had driven by, and it was situated higher up than the creek was. And so I told her, I said, go to the road. We need to get out of here. We're not going back the way we came. And previous to this, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but before this all happened, I had turned around when I was lining up my shot, and I looked back down the creekway, and I could see the top of the falls from where we had came, and it was maybe 300 feet. So we weren't that far back up in there. And so once I got all my stuff packed up, I just kind of threw all my stuff in the bag, which for me, that's very abnormal because, I have a lot of expensive gear and, it's delicate. You can't just throw this stuff around. But that's how bad I wanted to get out of there.
What did you think was going on at this point?
I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on, but I just wanted to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I knew that something was not right. I didn't know what it was, but it was a feeling that I've never encountered before. And being a photographer, I'm always out in the woods taking pictures and, always out there way out in the middle of nowhere. And I've never encountered this feeling before. I mean, it was one of those feelings where it was just like a massive adrenaline dump. All I knew is I wanted to get out of there, and I wanted to get out of there now. And so we started heading for the road. And like I said earlier, it's an old growth forest. So, we were climbing under trees and over trees. I mean, trees so big I couldn't get my arms around. We were having to climb over these trees and under these trees. And we were just going as fast as we possibly could. And to get up to this road was a steep, almost ravine that we had to climb up. And we're trying to climb up this, and she's ahead of me, and this ravine is so steep, I've got both my hands on her butt, and I'm pushing her up while I'm trying to climb up too, just telling her, we gotta go. This isn't right. Well, we got up probably, I'd say 3/4 of the way to kind of a little area where we could kind of rest and catch our breath for a second. And I kind of stopped and, made sure I had good footing, and I turned around. And looking back across the creek was one clear area from where we were standing all the way to the other side of the creek where we could see without any trees in the way or anything like that. And on the other side of the creek was a ridge line that ran up above the creek, because the creek was like in almost like a depression, almost where you had 2 walls on opposite sides of the creek. And we were on one side of that looking across to the other. And I turned around and I looked, and I kind of stopped for a second. I didn't know what I was looking at first. And I pulled my girlfriend over and I said, babe, do you see that? And I pointed to what I was looking at. And, you could hear her go like that. And she goes, what the F is that? And I said, yeah, I don't know. Looking at this thing, it was standing on two legs. It was probably about 5'6", 5'7", maybe. And it was gold color, like a bright gold color, just standing there. And I got the feeling that it could see us just as well as we could see it. And it was just standing there watching us. And then that's when I got this feeling that if we didn't get out of there now, we were never going to get out of there. Something bad was going to happen, and we were never going to be found again. We'd just be chalked up to two people, went hiking, and disappeared in the mountains somewhere.
Yeah, which tends to happen. I wanted to ask you regarding what you saw. How far away is the creature from where you're at?
I would probably say, probably by this point, probably 300 feet, give or take, through all that. But we had an absolute clear view of this thing standing on the ledge, and it just stood there and looked at us. And to me, it looked like I was looking at a man. It was humanoid shaped, standing on two legs. It wasn't big like the thing that we had saw earlier down at the creek. This was kind of, a smaller figure, if you will.
How was it built? I realize the height isn't that big. I mean, 5'6", 5'7", I'm 3-4 inches taller than it. But as far as the size, how would you describe the size of it?
I would say it was kind of on the slender side. I mean, it wasn't real stocky or muscular or anything like that. It wasn't, like I was saying earlier, the thing that we saw down below, this thing was massive. You could tell that it was really built big. Well, this was smaller. I would say a slender build, but it gave off this aura of intimidation. I mean, just looking at this thing, you were going, crap. This isn't good.
It was obviously looking in your direction.
Yeah, it was looking directly at us.
Now, were you able to get any details? I realize 300 yards is kind of far away to where you could make out the shape of it. You realize it's probably the color, the shape. Mm-hmm. You realize it's standing up. But were you able to see any details?
Honestly, for me at that point, I was just focused on getting back to the road and getting to the car.
I gotcha.
Because I was trying to keep her calm because she's never experienced anything like this at all. And she was starting to freak out.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think most people probably would in that situation. Especially it sounds like they were all around you in different times, ducking behind trees. Did you ever hear any vocalization at this point, or is it pretty silent?
It was silent. It was actually really, really silent. Well, getting ahead of myself, I'll just tell the rest of this part of the story and then go into the next part where we actually sat down and started talking about this. So I got her up to the road. And like I was saying earlier that we were, when this all started happening, we were only 300 feet from the top of the falls, which meant we shouldn't have been any more than a quarter of a mile away from our car. We ended up having to walk 2 miles to our car. I mean, it was getting to the point where we were starting to wonder if the car was even going to be there at all. We went down turned around a couple bends in the road and no car. And a couple times along the way, we could hear twigs breaking in the woods off to the right of us, which is where the creek was. I just got the feeling that whatever we had saw, one of them or both of them were watching us and following us as we walked. I was trying to not run, trying to keep calm enough just to keep a good, fast, steady pace and not run because, I'm thinking, if I run, are these things going to start taking off after us and really going after us?
Smart. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to try and keep calm. And I was talking to her, trying to keep her calm too about the situation because I could tell every time we came up to where we thought the car should be and the car wasn't there, she was getting more and more antsy about that fact. And honestly, I was too, because at this point I'm thinking, we're not going to find this car and that's going to be the end of us. It was really like we wandered into some kind of twilight zone.
Yeah. And I can understand that.
Yeah. Finally we get to the car and we probably walked a good 45 minutes before we got to the car. We got to the car and we got in and we looked at her phone because one of the things I noticed is, it didn't seem to be getting dark at all. And I'm thinking to myself, once we got back to the car, I'm doing the math in my head. And I'm thinking, okay, it took 30 minutes to climb the falls. We stopped at the falls for another 20 minutes to wait out the rain. We stopped a couple times, for me to take pictures, to, set up my gear, move my gear, all that. It takes time. We got back to the car and it was just now 7:00, and we had gotten into the falls and it was like 20 after 6. So somewhere along the lines, we lost a whole bunch of time somewhere. It should have been way later. I mean, going by the math, it should have been getting close to, 9:00 by that point in time. And, we just both kind of looked at each other, and, she looked at her phone, I looked at my phone. We verified that both phones had the same time. And then, after you have that massive adrenaline surge, you kind of have that crash when that happens. It was kind of like that. I just kind of had to sit there for a second and just kind of think about what just happened, trying to figure out what it was. And we started talking and, just kind of tossed around ideas about what exactly happened. What did we just witness? And, I told her, how I was feeling, and she told me that she felt the exact same way. And I asked her, I said, what happened? I said, you walked up ahead of me and you came back, and that's when everything just went south. And what she told me was, when she went up ahead of me, there was an area in the creek that kind of looked like a little cave, or kind of like a grotto type thing, kind of had like a little overhang. And she said that she wanted to take a picture of that. And so she pulled out her phone to take a picture of that, and her phone locked up. And then she told me that all of a sudden she heard kind of almost like a growl, like a really low pitched kind of growl. And then she heard this ringing noise in her ears. She said it was way, way, way deeper than any ringing noise she had ever heard. And she experienced this kind of tingly hot sensation in her chest that kind of spread out and went down around her arms. And she said that's when she got this feeling that something was really bad. Something was up there that was not good. And that's when she came back to get me. And then that's when everything happened with the tree and, seeing the big guy and then this other little thing. And so after that, we went and had dinner. And so we're looking through, I'm looking through my phone and everything, and she's looking through her phone, and she goes, "Oh my God," and kind of drops her phone. And I said, "What?" And she hands her phone to me, and that's the image that I sent you. And I was shocked, really, because she had taken 2 photos. She took one photo before this photo, and that thing wasn't in the photo. And then in this other photo, here's this black creature looking thing in the upper left-hand corner. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm, enlarging it, and, I can see a face looking around a tree kind of hunched up over. And she was telling me that, she didn't see that. She wasn't even trying to take a picture of that. And, so after that, it was just kind of surreal, really. I mean, we spent the rest of the night talking about it, trying to figure out, what exactly we encountered. But what she thought that whatever these things were, they were trying to protect that cave or grotto area. Because she said that's when it all started. Because she said she was feeling fine. She didn't notice anything when she was standing by me. But as soon as she got up close to that, that's when everything started.
Yeah, and that's interesting. A couple things are interesting about what you just said. First of all, that picture, it's definitely not definitive, but it's interesting. You sent me that picture, and I don't even know if you left me a comment when you sent me the picture. I just looked at the picture. I didn't even read your comment. I looked at the picture, and my eyes were immediately drawn to what you're talking about. I was like, oh, he sent me a picture of the falls. He must have snapped a picture of the falls, and I was immediately drawn to the left-hand corner of that picture because I was like, well, what is that? It's a very fascinating picture. It makes you wonder, too. I don't know how I feel about the infrasound thing, man. I really don't know what to think about the infrasound. Infrasound is something very natural. A lot of large animals have the ability to produce infrasound Tigers do it. A lot of predators do it. But what's interesting about what you just said, I had this guy on. Actually, I've talked to several witnesses. One guy I can think of in particular, he was walking a trail with his friends, and he started walking towards the bushes, and he started disrobing. And his friends grabbed him and said, what are you doing? And he said he felt hot. He just felt this hot sensation through his body, and his ears were ringing. And what's interesting about what he said, or what his friend said that there was something in the bushes growling. Now, they didn't see what was growling at them. One of his friends said it sounded like a tiger growling in the bushes. It sounded like a huge lion or something growling. And some of the other witnesses that were there said the same thing. What's interesting is he was ahead of the group, about 40, 50 feet ahead of them on a trail. He claims he never heard the growling, but what happened is his ears started ringing. He felt a hot sensation and started disrobing, started taking his clothes off.
Oh, wow.
He started walking towards the bushes of basically where the growling was coming from. Whether it was a Sasquatch encounter or not, they never saw anything. But what's interesting is, almost word for word, he describes the same thing your girlfriend talks about.
Wow, that's crazy.
Hot sensation. And I had another guy, Gord. He is a racing. He does mountain bike racing. And Gord, I'm sorry if I got it wrong. He does biking, and they do racing up mountains and everything like that. And he said the same thing. He got in a situation to where I think he had actually seen the creatures, and then there was growling, and he said he felt hot. His whole body felt hot, and so he wanted to start taking his clothes off on this trail. So you hear that stuff. I don't hear it that often, but I do hear it, and you're really not sure what to make of it. Is it infrasound causing that? I mean, I believe your girlfriend. Yeah. I've heard it from other witnesses, but is it infrasound causing that heat sensation? Is it adrenaline? Is it and the whole time thing? I get what you're saying about the time. I mean, I've experienced that myself. I had Mark Zasky on from Florida. He talked about that being in a situation kind of like yours, where the car should have been there, and as they're walking back, it's not there. And so they don't. He's trying to figure out. Makes you wonder: is it stress induced to where you kind of get disoriented and you're more worried about your own skin at that moment, and not really aware of where you're going or where you're at, or you're just trying to get away from the situation?
And I kind of wondered that too. And over the next, couple days, weeks, I methodically went back through. I found the location on Google Maps. I found the location where the falls is, and I found the location relative to where that road is. And, no matter how I try and come at it, it just does not add up from where we came out. Because when we came out of the falls, we didn't cut up towards, going in deeper. We went directly to the right-hand side, which was to the road. And, in my mind, 300 feet back from the top of the falls, no matter how I look at it, doesn't equate into 2 miles. I just, I can't for the life of me figure it out. I've done the math. I've looked at everything, even looking at Google Maps, the way the road goes. Where we came out of versus where the falls is would be way, way, way back, way further than we were. I know for a fact that I turned around and looked and observed where the top of the falls were in relation to where we were, because I could still see them. I could still see the top of the big falls. If we had gone that far back to where it was 2 miles back to the car, I wouldn't be able to see the top of the falls, because it, just wouldn't have been visible.
Well, what do you think happened?
I have a couple different theories. At first, my first thought was, we kind of stumbled on to, water spirits. The first things that popped in my mind were water spirits, golems, things like that. That was the first thing that, to me made sense, because she was telling me about this cave, and then that's when everything started happening. So I thought, well, I kind of wonder if, maybe we found a cave off to the side where that was, their lair, and they were trying to protect that.
What's a water spirit?
Oh, a water spirit if you go back into Native American mythology, they're elemental spirits, basically, that are, in different areas of the earth, depending on like ley lines, things like that. And they just, they're in areas where there's water spirits, or in areas where there's water. And some of them are mischievous, some of them are good spirits, I guess, if you will. And, from what I read, if you go to certain areas where these water spirits are, they can attack you. That was the first thing that popped into my head right away. I was thinking maybe we ran into an area that was, sacred ground, something like that, something that was an area that was haunted, maybe demonic, something, because like I was saying, and I grew up in Montana. I've spent a good majority of my life out in the woods, skiing, snowboarding, hiking, doing photography. And I've never, ever encountered something like this or had those kind of feelings. When we got back into town and the night was over, I got home and I posted it on Facebook, just out of curiosity to see if anybody else had ever experienced this. And I talked to 3 or 4 people that had encounters at this falls where we were. Nothing as drastic as what we encountered, but these people all had bad experiences there. One lady was telling me that she took her 2 big dogs up to the top of the falls, and they got up to the top of the falls, and the dogs right away went down on their bellies, and they were whining and would not move. I mean, she said she basically had to drag her dogs out of this area. And she said they're big dogs, like German Shepherd type dogs, that naturally you wouldn't think would be afraid. But she said as soon as they got to the top of the falls, the whole atmosphere changed, and these dogs just kind of went into panic mode and just froze. I talked to another lady who's a friend of mine. She's also a photographer, and she actually went up there at night, which I thought was, pretty crazy in and of itself. I mean, it's kind of a spooky place. It's an old growth forest. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. And she went up there at night, and she said she lasted 20 minutes and she was back in her truck crying.
Yeah.
She said, she just said that there was something wrong with this area. And, the couple people that I talked to that had experiences up there all voiced the same opinion, that something is not right in that area. Something's going on. One lady called it bad mojo. Another lady said that there was something up there, a creature of some kind, and it was just a bad place to be. And I've kind of tried to do some research around the area to see if there was any legends about it, and I've found a lot of UFO stuff that pertains to that general area, but nothing like Bigfoot. My experience was the only thing that I could find, Bigfoot type. Everything else was, UFOs and the like, and I've heard stories, where people have connected, Sasquatch to UFOs, walk-ins, things like that.
Right. Well, let me ask you, the creature that you saw at 300 yards that was golden, was it a physical being that you saw?
Oh yeah, it was physical. It was there. Oh, that's the other thing that I started to tell you when you were asking me about that earlier. When I was talking to my girlfriend, she said to her it looked feminine, and she said she got a very distinct feminine vibe from it.
Yeah, which could be the case. It's hard to say. I don't think that these things are paranormal, and I don't think that these things are aliens. But like I always say, I don't have one in my garage I'm studying, so I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I really don't think that they are. I think probably what you experienced, and again, I wasn't there. You know way more than I do on this, Alan. But yeah. I think probably what you experienced is a fight or flight type situation. It's not as paranormal as people think when you walk into an area and you think, okay, there's something wrong here. There's some danger nearby. I need to get out of here. Even before you ever see anything, it's not as paranormal as most people think. I've had a cougar stalk me, and I immediately started feeling like there's something wrong. I'm in danger or something. Yeah. And I hadn't seen the cougar at this point, but I had that feeling like something's not right. I'm being watched. There's something, and lo and behold, there's a cougar stalking us. So I think it's something that's built into us. It's a very fascinating encounter. It makes you wonder what's going on up there at those falls.
Yeah, it's just, in my mind, something's up there, so to speak. And, I've had a lot of people, tell me, well, I should go back and I should take trail cams up there. And, honestly, the analytical scientific part of me wants to go back and find out what this is. But the realistic part of me says, no way, because the other feeling that I got when we were standing there looking at this thing was that it had marked us. That if, I came back, it would know who I was, and there would just be big trouble. And so I haven't been back, and I don't have any plans to go back just because of this. I mean, it gives me shivers just thinking about everything that happened. And, the thing that just kind of amazes me is, I didn't have any feelings about the place, until she came back. I saw the look on her face, and then the branch came rocketing out of the tree.
Yeah. Did you ever look up? Did you ever see where that was coming from?
Yeah, we both looked up, and we weren't near trees. I mean, the nearest tree was probably 4 feet away. I wasn't leaning on anything. So, I mean, it wasn't a situation where I bumped a tree which had a, branch dislodge or anything like that. It wasn't anything like that. This branch just came rocketing out of the tree. And, the other thing that my girlfriend had said is, I forgot about this part. Right after the branch hit my hand, she said she had looked up there when we both looked up there, and she thought she saw something up there, up above us.
That's interesting. What does your girlfriend think about the subject of Bigfoot, or how does she feel about the encounter since all of this happened?
Well, it scared her for, a good week or so. She said she had trouble sleeping. She'd have to turn on the light. She kept, replaying it over and over in her mind. And, like I was saying earlier, this was her first ever, I guess paranormal, if you want to call it, or just, out there experience.
Yeah, just a weird thing that happened.
Yeah, and it really affected her. I remember her commenting that it was one hell of a way to spend a first anniversary.
Yeah, I understand that. I get what she's saying there.
Yeah, she said it was definitely memorable. And, a lot of the people that I've talked to since then are, absolutely convinced that it's Bigfoot. At first I was kind of on the fence about it, but the more I got to thinking about it, when I got to thinking about the big black thing that I saw dart between the trees and then, the creature or whatever peering at us, I think it's probably pretty possible that it was Bigfoot. Because really, realistically, on a, biological sense, I guess, if you will, that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, it sounds like your typical Sasquatch encounter. Well, not your typical, but I mean, it sounds like your Sasquatch type encounter. I think it's hard when you're in those situations, especially when you're trying to figure out where the car's at, and you're walking back and you're like, Jesus, the car should be here, and we're keep on walking. I had an encounter where I lost time. I can't tell you what happened to the time. So I get what you're saying. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard sometimes to separate what's really going on in a situation like that. And you'll understand what I mean. If there wasn't that time issue, and if the car was right there, you would have chalked it up to just a Bigfoot encounter. But having those things and your girlfriend feeling hot, just weird things happening, makes you almost wonder, like with my own encounter, if you ask Woody, my brother, in our encounter, he still kind of has one foot in the paranormal door. He's like, I don't know what happened to the time. What happened? How did this thing move like this?
Yeah.
How did it? Nothing moves like that. And so I get that. You always have questions about that encounter. And I think sometimes you can chalk it up to logical things, but it's hard when you're recounting something like that. And you're like, God, what happened to the time? Where did the car? How did we get this far out? In those situations, I think sometimes what happens is you have the adrenaline dump. You're in protective mode. You're trying to save your own skin and your girlfriend's skin, and maybe getting turned around. I mean, it's hard for me to even analyze that because I can't tell you I wasn't there. but I get it, and I've heard it before from people in the past, and I've experienced that to some degree myself. So it won't leave you for a while, I can tell you that much.
Oh no, I mean, it's been what, a month today? Today's the 10th, so yeah, it's been a month, and every day I think about some part of it, and try to replay it. And I'm a very analytical person, so I like to break things down from every possible angle to approach something to try and get a realistic answer. And like I was saying earlier, man, no matter which way I go with this thing, I keep coming up with zeros. Nothing adds up, no matter how I look at it, no matter what I take into account. It just all comes back as unexplained. And one of the things I was telling my dad about it the next day. And, I told him about the big guy down by the creek and then the smaller one up on the ridge. And he looks at me and he goes, well, what do you think of that possibly being its mate? And I hadn't thought about it at that point. And I kind of stopped and I thought, well, that would make sense. It was smaller than the one that we saw down by the creek, and going by what my girlfriend said, having feminine-esque features and putting off a feminine vibe, maybe we stumbled into, their home, if you will, and maybe they were trying to, protect that area, and we just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, that could be a possibility. 5'6", 5'7", that's pretty small for Montana. That's more of juvenile size, I think. Again, I don't have one in my garage I'm studying, but for most witnesses I talk to, that's pretty small, especially for me. I mean, that would be more of juvenile size. It's hard to say. A lot of times, even when people have encountered, like I'll give you an example on this, Alan. I talked to a guy tonight. I'm going to have him on the show. He was in a camper, and he said that he'd been camping in this spot for a month or two every year for the last 9 years. He's in his camper, and this thing comes up, starts tapping on top of the roof of his camper. Now, he's not under a tree. He's not under something that would, knock nuts down or knock leaves down or knock. So there's nothing really that should be tapping on top of his roof, but this thing's tapping on his roof. And he said that it was breathing almost like it was sick. It was real heavy breathing. And he doesn't know what it is, so he steps outside of his camper to go figure out, go look at what's going on. And he's 15 feet away from, he said, a half ape, half person. It had breasts. It was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen before. And it had kind of vocalized a cooing noise. And then he said it turned and it walked off. And he's like, I went back to my camper and I just sat and looked at the wall for about 8 hours after that, trying to figure out what I ran into. So what I'm trying to say, I say that to tell you this, even if you don't have anything weird happen, it's hard, like loss of time or the feeling of getting hot or some of the different things that you guys experienced, it's still hard to digest. Seeing these things is hard to digest.
Yeah, it is. And, and the biggest thing for me to kind of reconcile with the experience was the feelings that it generated. I mean, earlier this summer, I'll give you an example. Earlier this summer, we were down at a bison range I guess it's about 80 miles away, and we had our two children with us. I have a 5-year-old and she has a 2-year-old. And we were out on this little nature trail, and we walked by this lady and said hi, and she said hi. We got about 10 feet away from her and she shouted bear. And we turned around and looked, and coming down the hill that was right next to this nature trail was a grizzly sow and 2 cubs.
Oh, Jesus.
And yeah, I mean, we had to get by them to get back to the car. And we've got little kids with us. And I tell you, the feelings that initiated versus what this thing initiated, universes apart. Yeah. I mean, that one, with the bear, that was like, okay, the stomach kind of dropped, but with this was completely different. This was, if we don't get out of here, we're going to get killed. We're going to disappear and nobody's ever going to find us again. Yeah. I mean, 2 vastly different feelings that I experienced. I just can't relate the 2 of them because they're so vastly different.
Yeah, I think, well, even grizzly bears can be unpredictable, but for the most part, you can kind of predict what a grizzly bear is going to do. And with these things, it's just different. You just don't know what, A, you don't even really know what you're up against, and B,
Yeah.
they're so unpredictable in different
Yep.
situations. They may come unglued, they may not. It really depends on, I think, the creature you run into. But they're very unpredictable. At least with a grizzly bear, you know what you're up against. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very true. But I just kind of tend to think that maybe this is kind of a local area for these things. Since the other people I've talked to have had, their own experiences up there, it just kind of seems like this is maybe, one of their stomping grounds, I guess.
Yeah, I'll have to ask Anthony Moffat, what part of, he's a researcher there in Montana. What part of Montana is it? Is it northeast? Is it?
Yeah, it's only is about 40 miles from the Canadian border.
Oh, okay.
So you're heading up towards the Canadian border. Up there to, if you go up to the Canadian border through there, you go into BC.
I gotcha. I know where it's at now. I'll have to ask Anthony Moffat. I know he's always in that area. He's always researching that area, and the guy walks like, I don't know, 800 miles a day. He's always up in the hills, and he's always researching stuff. So I'll have to ask him if he's ever been in that area. But I can't thank you enough, Alan, for coming on the show and sharing it. I wish I had some great advice for you and say, well, this is why you felt this way, or this is why you experienced this. But there's a lot of questions I even have on a lot of that stuff. And like I said, I believe you guys. Yeah. I've heard it many times before. The same things you're talking about, the loss of time, being turned around, your girlfriend talking about what sounds like infrasound to me, but
Yeah.
I've heard all of that before.
Yeah. And, doing some research after the fact, that's kind of what I came away with, is that it's all these kind of things seem to be pretty normal with, Sasquatch encounters. When I was talking to you before earlier on the phone, I told you that, we had Joe Hauser as a common friend, and we had talked to him, and his indication was it was a Bigfoot. He said he thought without a doubt it was a Bigfoot that we experienced, because we talked about the same things, the low sound in the ears and, the hot flash type feeling type thing. He said, yeah, that's all from, his experience. That's all pretty common with Bigfoot.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Joe. I think you guys did have a Bigfoot encounter. Absolutely.
Maybe someday I'll go back up there and I'll let you know what happens, but it's not going to be anytime soon. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I hear you there. Well, Alan, thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing the encounter.
Yeah, absolutely, Wes. Thanks for having me on. It was good to, be able to talk to someone about this that's had their own experience and dealt with their own, situation involving Bigfoot.
Yeah, and if I'm ever in Montana, I'll have to look you up, have you take me up there. I'd love to check out the area myself.
Yeah, definitely. I'll take you up there and show you, exactly where it happened. It's one thing I'm not ever going to forget. I know that.
Yeah, I hear you there. Thank you again, Alan.
You betcha.
Next up on the show is Chris, and Chris actually comes from Southern California, and he had a strange encounter back in the 80s when he was out in the forest, and he'll go into that. But Chris, thank you for being here.
Hey, Wes, it's a pleasure. I'm a big fan of your show. It's an awesome show.
Thanks, man. Thanks. And I wanted to start off. I know you've been researching this topic for a long time, and you've looked into some historical accounts, and I can really appreciate that because I love historical accounts. But prior to all of that, you actually had an encounter, and if you would you walk us into the encounter? Tell us what you experienced.
Sure. Well, it was back in the 80s. Like, I don't know what, it was late 80s. I got a friend that lives up in Humboldt County, what they now call the Emerald Triangle. And he grew weed. And I came up for, like, on vacation to come visit him. And I'm like, and he goes, hey, you want to come out and help me? I need a water. I'm like, oh, okay, why not? Being a young kid, I was up for an adventure. So, we partied a little bit that night, and the next day we got a kind of a later start. It was like early afternoon maybe, and we go hiking down. And prior to that, I forgot to say we were packing because a week before he was out there, he had a face-to-face encounter with a mountain lion, and he was unarmed. But luckily, the stare down, he won, and the cat went away. So we had my friend's girlfriend dropped us off down off this logging road, and we hiked all the way back down to water his crop. So when we got to the crop, he had these crop area where he was growing. He had me go down to the stream. He had a pump down at this river. It's called the Eel River, which is up there in Humboldt County. Had me go down to the bottom where the river was, get the hose up, turn on the pump, the motor, He had a gas motor, and pump the water up to his holding ponds up there, which watered his crop. And while I was down there, it was just like I had this uneasy feeling. It felt like I was being watched. It was very uncomfortable while I was down there, running the pump to fill up his pond. So while I was down there, and then the whole time, back then they had the camp. It was called Campaign Against Marijuana Producers, which was the DEA and the sheriffs, and it was kind of like scary. I was thinking anytime those guys are going to jump out and bust us or, whatever.
Yeah.
It felt like someone was watching the whole time. And I had this uneasy feeling. So after, me being down there and he pumped the water up to his little ponds up there, he had a little gravity feed, which he had a little small patch of like 10, 12 plants, 15. He was cleaning the water leaves and I'm like, hey, let's go. And he's like, just chill out. I go, man, I felt really uneasy about the whole situation. He's like, don't worry. It might be that mountain lion. I'm like, all right. And he's out there, picking off the water leaves and taking his time. And finally we got to go. And I'm like, oh my God, it felt like hours because I was really uneasy the whole time. So we go walking back we're walking back up from his patch to the logging road, and then there was something crashing in the bushes paralleling us. And at first I'm like, hey, what's that? And he's like, well, that might be that cat. So, okay, we kept walking, and this was a few miles heading down there. This thing was paralleling us. It would stop. We would stop, look around. We were locked and loaded, but we weren't too worried, but we were like, it was nerve-wracking. We walked down the road again. We'd stop, it'd stop. And this was for a few miles walking down and this thing following us. And I'll never forget, but I was nervous. I was like, I wanted to get out of there. We come around a corner and we could see his girlfriend's vehicle at the distance, and we started hurried up the pace, and this thing just screamed at us. The scream was just unhuman. I never heard a scream like that. I mean, it was so loud. It scared. I almost crapped my pants. So then we started running, and then we got out of the car. We didn't even say anything. Didn't say nothing about it. And then the next day, when we didn't really say much about it. My friend's like, hey, I need to go back out there. And I'm like, hell no, I ain't going back out there. And then come to find out later, he never went back out there till after the season when it got cooler. He got his pump us, but he never went back either. That was pretty hairy. I never heard a scream like that before. It wasn't a mountain lion. I've been close to bears. I've been in the Sierras. I've seen bears and I've seen mountain lions, but this was pretty crazy.
Did you ever get a good look at what was pacing you?
No, because you could hear it crashing. It's a mixture. Like up in this area, there are redwoods, but smaller growth redwoods. A lot of brush, poison oak down in this ravine. You couldn't see it. We kept trying to see what it was, but we couldn't see it. It just kept paralleling us. It was crazy. I tried. I couldn't see what was going on. I heard the thing. I heard it paralleling us, but I didn't get to see it.
When you're walking out of there, very few animals will actually, I can't even think of any animals that will parallel you. If it was a cougar or a mountain lion, they're going to stalk you from the rear, or they're going to come from above, from a tree or from a branch. They generally don't parallel people.
Yeah.
And the scream, as you guys were leaving, I mean, that's scary, man. Had he noticed anything like that before when he had gone up in the past? I'm assuming if this was a grow operation, he's been up there a few times.
No, the only thing he had was an encounter with a big mountain lion. So the whole time they were down, he thought it was that cat, until the thing screamed, and then he started thinking different, Yeah. When the thing screamed, he knew it wasn't a mountain lion. He didn't really say too much after that.
What was your impression of the scream? What would you liken it to?
Kind of like the Ohio howl mixed with a screaming woman. It was like a screaming witchy woman howl. It was weird. I never heard anything like it. Never heard it. I haven't even heard it on the web. It just was a real unusual scream.
Do you know, did he ever experience anything else going back up there?
No, he never went back out to that area.
Oh, he never went back up, huh?
No, he didn't even go. He got his pump till after the fact. He let the thing go. That's how scared he was about it.
At what point did you think that maybe this was a Sasquatch as opposed to what was that?
It took me a few years later. I didn't know what it was, I have seen the legend of Boggy Creek and some, in search of and stuff. I'm an older fella. Like in the 80s, I was in my 20s. I didn't really start thinking about it too much till after, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so. Because I didn't really think much of it. I knew it was unusual. It scared the hell out of me, but now, after listening to your shows and doing my research over the years, it wasn't a bear, that's for sure.
If you would, now, a friend of yours actually had a dogman encounter. Do you want to tell the audience about that?
Sure. My friend, he was going down to this place called Lake Matthews. It's up here in Southern California, Riverside County. First thing I want to tell you, when people think about Southern California has pockets of populations and little pockets here and there, but if you look at it in a nutshell, there's a lot of rural areas, especially where I'm from, up in Riverside County by the San Jacinto Mountains. It's really rural, and it goes all the way out to the California desert. There's a lot of Indian reservations, a lot of BLM land. So Southern California is vast. California is a big state. I know Texas is bigger and Alaska is bigger, but California has got some really vast areas, very vast areas. So down where he had this Lake Matthews, he was going. He didn't give me the details what he was doing, but he was going to a friend's house, and he was driving down the road, and he said two or three other people were with him. And he saw this thing on the side of the road eating like roadkill. When he told me about his sighting, he goes, it was a chupacabra. But after I start talking to him a little bit, I think it was a dogman that was peering out over. He said it was just really wicked. I mean, evil.
Did he describe what he saw?
He said it looked kind of gargoyle-ish, kind of. Gargoyle-ish. I go to that point, he goes, yeah, and it had this red eyes. And it was standing over like roadkill on the side of the road. He said it was the weirdest, wickedest thing he's ever seen.
Yeah, that's interesting. How long ago did that sighting take place?
A couple years ago.
Because I know where you're at, Chris. I know the general area of where you're at. I drove through the area actually where you're at.
Oh, cool.
Just south of where you're at, those Border Patrol agents would talk about the dogman, almost a little bit more than the Sasquatch. They'd run into the Sasquatch. They call it something else down there, but basically it's a Sasquatch.
I think they call it the Zuby, or what my research is up here in this, they call it the Sandman, the Borrego Sandman, or pretty much the Sandman is what they call it up here.
Yeah, I was trying to think. It's more slang what the Border Patrol agents were using. But they have a particular name for the Sasquatch. And then but what they mainly run into is they call it the devil dog or the dog man, but they call it the devil dog. And they run into it mainly towards dusk or at night. They'll run into this creature.
Wow.
And they'll just call it the devil dog. That's interesting, the gargoyle description he gave. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say it in those terms, but he's definitely right on.
I'll get you his contact information, and I'll let him tell you the story. That be my pleasure. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to tell you about a story. He's also, like, where I live up here, this reservation. It's called Kauai. Have you heard of the Kauai Reservation?
Yeah, they have a major casino there, don't they?
No, they have a small casino. The oldest, but the smallest. The desert Kauai's have the Agu Caliente out there, Palm Desert. So there's Desert and Mount Kauai. My friend's Mount Kauai.
Oh, okay.
And I got a friend. My friend, he's a Native American. He told me, well, he knows I've always been fascinated doing my research, and it's pretty fascinating what the way tribal people look at it. He's like, Chris, you don't know what you're messing with. Because I wanted originally, and I took his warning, because when he was a kid, he said when he was a little kid out there by Kauai Mountain, they lived just below it on the reservation, they smelt this smell, and his grandmother got really scared and hurried him inside the house. And he said the next day they went out, there was like 17, 18 footprints out there. So definitely, I know the Kauai tribe definitely believes in him.
And I know you've been researching this for a while. What does your friend say about? I would assume you and him have had conversations. Regarding
many
this. What is their take on the subject?
From what my friend says, they respect him and fear him. They fear him more than anything else. He's like, you don't want to mess with these things. The way that his grandmother was putting it, when it was in the area, hurried him up and got him in the house. Kind of like maybe in their history that they had some bad experiences with these creatures.
And do they come around the reservation still today?
I am not sure. My friend hasn't talked too much about any sightings, but they're down the road outside outside the reservation. The latest sighting I heard was on what we call 79 South. And if you folks know, there's this town called Temecula. And 79 South, part of the old Butterfield stagecoach route in the 1800s. It's a historic stagecoach trail. And there's still areas where you can actually see the roads where they put together some areas on the BLM. You can actually see, the stagecoach roads where it was hard for them to get through. You can also see there's 2 stagecoach stops in my area, the Butterfield stage, and there's one down the road that's pretty much ruined. You have to have permission to see it, but they're still around today. So the last sighting I heard about, and my friend just told me, and he'll tell you about it too, this group of 3 people saw this thing on 79 run, take 3 steps across the highway, it disappeared. It said it was huge, and it ran like the wind. It was just super fast. So that's the last sighting that I've heard about recently. A couple years ago, there was a sighting of a Native American man at Vail Lake that saw one watching them on the cliffs, watching him and his kids. But it took off a little while later. But there are sightings.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. There is definitely sightings out there. And you're right, Southern California it's way more vast, even for me, than I realized. Especially,
it is.
It really is way more vast. But what's interesting, I noticed when I was out there, as you're driving along the highway and you kind of look over to your left and your right, it really looks like a barren wasteland. And it's not until you really pull off the highway and you go to some of these areas that you realize it's not as barren as you think. There's actually, I know around Otay Lakes or the Otay River, there's some areas down there where it's pretty dense.
Yeah, big time. Up above L.A., up there in the L.A. National Forest, that is rural too. And you got 3 million people down in the mountain.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, I think with these creatures live closer to us than I think a lot of people realize. And I think if people realize that, they'd probably freak out. because they're definitely closer to populations than most people know.
I remember you had some gentleman on, and I know the area. I ain't going to disclose it, but I'm a local guy. I lived down here all my life. I know exactly where he's talking about. It's on the foot of the San Bernardino National Forest, and that's big time rural too. It is big time rural, and there's document sightings there for years, like the Speedway monster. There used to be out there by Fontana. They used to call it the Speedway monster. Have you heard about that story?
I have, but why don't you go and tell the audience?
Yeah, there's a Sasquatch that used to rat. What I was researching, there were sightings of this Bigfoot down by this racetrack, and they call it the Speedway monster. And a lot of people documented and witnessed this creature down there, and that's just right below the San Bernardino National Forest. Fontana's like a rock throw above the San Bernardino National Forest.
Yeah, and that encounter is very interesting too, because it wasn't like a one-time sighting. You know, that particular creature would actually come out almost to watch the race, and it would freak people out. He would kind of come out of the forest. He'd kind of watch. Several witnesses saw that creature over several years. So it wasn't just a one-time, you got some crazy guy in the audience saying he's seeing some monster. This was several witnesses over several years, and you're right, they dubbed it the Speedway monster.
Down to the Speedway monster, in that same era, it's called Corona, California. I'm not Corona. Yeah, Corona. This is all of Riverside, San Bernardino, I'm just doing all these spots where, witnesses have documented this. In Corona, they had these kids that be out in these orange fields, and they were chased out by a monster. Back in like the 70s, there was documentation. Have you heard about that one?
I haven't.
Yeah, there's I got all the stuff. I'll research it and give you all the documentations. But yeah, there's the kids out in this orange grove. Now over there, if you picture Southern California below Los Angeles, the lower part of Southern California, you got the Cleveland National Forest, which is two pockets. You got pockets of it through Orange County. You got pockets of it through Riverside. And then you got pockets of it that go all the way down to the Cleveland National Forest. Then on the other side, you got the San Bernardino National Forest, which has two pockets of forest. You have the San Jacinto Mountains, and then on the other side, you have the San Bernardino Mountains. And San Gorgonio is the highest point in Southern California, which is Big Bear area. And then on the other side, you have the San Gabriel Mountains over towards L.A. And they've had people out panning for gold out in the the San Gabriel River out there that have seen these things also that are documented. When you look at the vast areas that, in my opinion, there's family groups. And I think these family groups, if you look at the pockets also, and you look at the Sierra Nevadas, there's also witnesses accounts of seeing these things in the deserts in Palmdale, Lancaster, Joshua Tree, out in that area, and that's in the pockets where they call a Great Basin, which goes up to the Sierra Nevadas. So I think these things migrate. Yeah, they migrate vast areas. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. On that. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find them stick around in one area, although that does happen. It's not, I have heard, I'm talking to a witness right now. He lives, well, I guess I can't say where he lives, but he is a pilot, and he's afraid to come on the air because he doesn't want them to take his pilot license away from him.
I don't blame him.
Yeah, I don't blame him one bit either, And I get it. I've talked to pilots in the past, and if they say they saw a UFO, they pretty much go with whatever they're told to say so that they can keep flying. And so anything fringe, you know what I mean? They try to stay away from because they'll ground you. They'll take your pilot's license. But he's a professional pilot, and he said, "Hey man, I bought this property several years back." 13 years back, and I started seeing these creatures out on my property. He goes, it wasn't until about 2 years of living there. He goes, we'd hear weird stuff. We'd have weird stuff happen around the house, or things in the yard would be moved around. He goes, I guess I didn't care enough really to pay too much attention to it. He goes, well, one night I was coming home and I saw, 2 of these monkeys running across the road. He goes, they were huge. He goes, I couldn't believe it. And he goes, I've seen them probably in 13 years. I've probably seen them 3 times. But I was asking him about activity. When does activity pick up? When does activity die off? And, he gave me some rough figures, but for the most part, in his opinion, was that they just never really leave. They're not constantly on his property, but they're around the property constantly. So sometimes I think if they have food, if they have cover, and the resources are there, I think they'll stick it out in an area. But I tend to agree with you, Chris. I think by definition, these things, generally speaking, will move from one location to another. I don't know if it's resources. I don't know if it's built into them. I don't know, why they do it, but that does seem to be the case.
Hey, Wes, when you look at this stuff, you see the sighting maps, like in the middle of America, you don't see them there, but where there's water sources, you see a lot of, activity. The other thing, too, that I want to point out is water sources. Right now, even though we have a drought, there's still the lakes around. We could name all kinds of lakes, right, even in the desert. And my theory is, it's just a theory, that they, in the wintertime, they'll come down off the mountains and travel because, to different feeding grounds. They don't stay up in the Sierras. I think they move up to the Sierras in the summer, and then in the fall they'll move down to the southern plain, further down south. And then they can move unseen down. There's vast areas of the desert. There's pockets of water. There's springs. I'm very certain that they can move. What the documentation says about how fast these creatures are, they could probably cover a couple ground. I could see them coming from the Sierras down to the southern plain, probably a week and a half. What's your theory on that, Wes?
I think so, especially in California, where I would see them migrating more in a place like California or a place like Texas or a place like, down south, as opposed to like Washington State. They might move up and down through British Columbia and then come back through Washington State. But I think for the most part, they don't have to travel as far. It's almost like you got to put yourself in their shoes.
Exactly.
And in California, the areas you're talking about, if they stayed in a particular area, I wouldn't imagine it would take too long to eat up all the resources in the area, and there's nothing left to eat, or there's not that much water left, so I think I tend to agree they would have to move around, especially in a place like Southern California.
Wes, we have bighorn sheep here, the Southern Peninsula bighorn sheep. We have mule deer. As a matter of fact, last winter I hit one in my car. We have deer, fast. Countless amount of rabbits. Rabbits everywhere. There's all kinds of things for them to eat. But my theory, like you said, I think they travel around a lot. They're probably family clans, and they got to reproduce. And I think, there's probably, I don't know, I think there's quite a few different clans in the Southern California area.
And, like you said with the dogman encounter you were just saying in the beginning with your friends, these things are opportunistic. A lot of people, I don't know how much I can really push that on the audience, but they're very opportunistic. If there's dead food on the side of the road, they're going to stop and eat it, just like the dogman will, just like anything else. And so I think these things being so opportunistic, in the area that you're at, Chris, they would have to move around. Otherwise, they would rape all the resources in the area.
Now picture you've been to Otay. Now, picture that whole stretch. There's, from Otay to where I live, to the San Jacinto Range, they could travel through there big time. If you look on the map, the topo maps, you can see vast rural areas where they could just come travel through, no problem, not being seen. I witnessed encounter in Julian. They seen him in Julian. I got this one account in the 1800s, if you want to go there.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's been encounters here since the 1800s on the Butterfield stage ranch. They call it. They call the spring the waterways where they go through a dead man's hole. They found a dead person in there. And what they said, that they had a wild man out there on the Butterfield stage back in the 1800s that killed some people. And they went out in the back area and hunted it and killed it. And from what I gathered on the documentation is, after they killed this creature and brought it down to San Diego for the fair, to show, and then it disappeared. Yeah, that was in the 1800s, and they called it the Wild Man. And this thing was not nice. I mean, it was killing people, people on the Butterfield stage.
Did they describe how he was killing them?
I'll get you the whole full story, Wes. I found it yesterday. It's on Bobby Shorts. If you type up in Google, go to Warner Springs Bigfoot, you'll see the whole story on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole story's right there, talking about Dead Man's Hole. And these things were being witnessed back in the 1800s, and then they even have documentations about the missionaries down in Orange County of the wild people on the Santa Ana River. The Santa Ana River goes from San Bernardino Mountains all the way out to the Pacific Ocean, and they talk about them seeing them back way back when the Padres were out here, the Spanish.
That's really the part that drives me nuts about this topic.
Yeah, they'll kill something and then it disappears.
Well, not only that, but, it's interesting. When you start reading a lot of historical accounts, and I've read a lot of them, you could almost take that historical account and rewrite it, and it would be like an encounter someone today had. Rewrite it in the sense that they called him Wild Man, they called him Sandman, they called him Chicken Man. But if you plug in, a different name like Bigfoot into those encounters, they read like an encounter would today. And so it's frustrating for me because, and maybe it's because of the soup I swim in, but, when you start looking at historical accounts and they're describing the exact same thing people today are describing to the T.
Yeah.
And, I've had a lot of witnesses on the show. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I can guarantee probably 99% of them have never read that historical account. They just, hey, I had an encounter. But what's interesting, if you take their encounter, compare it to an encounter 200 years ago, they read the same.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's like, well, what a coincidence that is, The historical documents that you read when the Spanish were here are saying the same things that we're seeing today. And then you got all these people denying, their existence. We both know, and I'm sure many of the listeners on this podcast know that these things are real. And I don't know why they're trying to deny this stuff. And the main thing that really frustrates me as the research is people getting hurt by these things. And they're so lackadaisical about it. I mean, it's like, it's no big deal. It is a big deal, especially if it's your child. You're out in the forest camping, and then your child disappears or someone disappears. That's not, what's wrong with this picture?
Well, money makes people crazy.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's just messed up.
Yeah.
And the other documentations here that I've been doing my research is, have you heard of the Juan Bautista Trail?
No.
It's the old Spanish trail. You can look it up. It goes through the area I live in. And there was a jogger. I don't know exactly what date it was, Wes. He was jogging through the area on the Bautista Trail. And the Bautista Trail goes all the way like through the San Jacintos down this, it's called Bautista Road. It goes from this rural area called Anza all the way down to Hemet. And this guy was jogging through and got attacked by one of these things. minding his own business. This is documented. There's also documentation down there in the lower area just above Hemet of sightings of 10-foot beings being down there. So it's just amazing when you do all your homework and all your researches and just looking at all this documentation. It just adds up.
Yeah, it starts to after a while, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then like on the other side, on the San Jacinto, there's the Lake Hemet, which is the water reservoir for the Hemet. The city of Hemet gets water. They have documentation that witnesses saw him going through the garbage cans out there at the campsites there. So, I mean, how many times have you heard those documentations about them being, dumpster divers? Like you said, they're opportunistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you ever want to come up, you got a place to stay. I'll be more than glad, I'll take some time off and I got access to 4-wheel drive. I could take you to some areas, just to show you we could do some research and show you the old stagecoach stops and stuff. And if you want, anytime, man, just let me know. Give me a heads up.
I appreciate it, Chris, and thanks for coming on the show, man.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. This stuff intrigues me big time.
And I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you, Chris.
No problem. And after we hang up, I got a couple more things to talk to you about, if you like.
All right, cool.
I just want to say, a shout out. Hey, all you guys, man, this is a great show. I love this show. I found it by accident a few years ago, but just keep doing what you're doing, Wes. I'm a big fan.
Thanks, Chris. And again, if you've had an encounter you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And again, look for it this weekend. I'll be posting that video. I'm making plans to head up to Mount St. Helens, and I'll be filming all that for you guys. So look for that this weekend. Until next time, everyone, have a great